It's not that I'm proud of this movie in the sense that it's one of my greatest works by any means. It was really hamstrung by the difficulties we faced, and we had to find ways to do as good a job as we could under the circumstances and time. And I ended up in a hospital for 2 weeks at the end of shooting because I was completely exhausted. I had ulcers and all kinds of physical maladies. It was just completely death-defying project. And it was a really extremely challenging project to do because it had as many shots in it as Star Wars and Close Encounters combined that we had to do in 6 months. So the idea that we came up with, and I was with my partner Richard Jurisic, who was really an incredible, masterful filmmaker. We said, well, we can dam the torpedoes, so to speak, and we're going to figure out how to do this thing, and it will require working 24 hours a day. We're going to have crews, 3 crews a day, 7 days a week for the whole 6 months. And we're actually going to split the work between our company and John Dykstra's company. And they were all VistaVision and we were all 70 millimeter, so we had to figure out how to combine different formats as well during the production. It's very technologically complicated. The idea was that we began the effects production on this movie, and Bob Wise, the director of the movie, his style of filmmaking was that if he was shooting a live action scene, he would only shoot the portion of it he intended to actually use in the cut. He would have an actor do one line and then just stop the camera, instead of continuously running the camera and giving himself more editorial options. So one of the problems that beset the movie that I was faced with was they would pretty much almost finish the live action on the movie when this started, was that he had edited himself into a box. There was no way to put this movie together without actually abandoning whole thousands of feet of already shot footage that could not be fixed. I said, I can't fix this for you. I just have to design a whole new sequence that will tell what you're trying to tell, but we're going to do it in a different way. So I had a tremendous amount of creative freedom given to me by Bob Wise and the studio, and a virtually unlimited budget to get done as much as we could possibly done, to plug all these holes in the movie and make it work. Got it done. We did some pretty cool things. If you go through the list of people on our crew, they all became pretty big names in the visual effects industry later on. I felt I had a couple of responsibilities. One was that the Enterprise itself, which was the iconic object, the spacecraft that would do all this stuff in the entire series, originally was very dumb looking, very low budget, very clunky, not very interesting. And when I came on this production, they had already built the Enterprise at the Magicam model shop, and I thought it looked terrible as well. And I started asking a couple of questions. I said, how are you going to light the Enterprise? And what happens in this story? And they said, well, we're going to have a key light over here and a fill light over here, and that'll be it. And I said, I don't think that's going to work. I think we have to redesign the entire lighting system of the Enterprise and redesign the painting surface of the Enterprise to make it one of the most beautiful spacecraft you've ever seen in your life. And we have to redesign this dry dock that they wanted to put it in, which had all these lights in it too, which really constituted a giant soft light box. So the Enterprise would look totally boring. I said, we have to redesign that as well. And so Richard Jurisic and I came up with this whole new lighting concept, part of which was based on making the Enterprise so it could light itself up. That even if it was in deep space where there's no sun, no planet, no moon, no key, no fill, no nothing, it would look interesting and be credible as having lights on itself that shined up onto the nacelles, lights on the nacelles that shined onto the body of the spacecraft, lights underneath that would shine up under the disk, and lights on the top that would shine out over the top of the disk. And so we completely tore the model apart, rebuilt the entire lighting system using a lot of the crew members that came off of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, who had designed special lights and special neon and all kinds of stuff so we could really redo this thing. And then I hired a really wonderful, gifted airbrush artist, I think his name was Ron Gress, to paint the entire Enterprise with these tiny, tiny little panels of slightly different colors, tonalities, and reflectivities so that it looked much more interesting than just a fiberglass plate. And he did a beautiful job, and that really made it all come together. So this sequence was all about arriving at the Enterprise and kind of cruising around it and doing this kind of series of reveal shots where the first shots, you see the dry dock with the Enterprise in it way off in the distance and you can't tell what it is. As you approach, you have to look through this dry dock to the Enterprise, which is docked inside of it. So you never quite get to see it well. And as the little shuttle vehicle passes the Enterprise, we had to have a lot of interactive lighting, so it seemed to actually be there. And it all ended up where you keep getting kind of frustrated because you're looking through all these foreground pieces of the of the dry dock, the shuttle comes around and you find it turns and then faces the Enterprise from the front. That's the big reveal shot. I wanted it to be this beautiful, epic, spectacular sequence that had no dialogue, no story, no plot. Everything stops for, I think it's about 4 minutes. Let the audience just love the Enterprise. Star Trek was a television series produced by Paramount, developed by Gene Roddenberry. It was quite successful over the years, but it kind of came and went, and they would cancel the series, and then all the fans would come back and say, no, you got to get the series going again. And so there was an endless wellspring of interest in Star Trek that the studio actually didn't fully understand or comprehend. It led to their idea that they could actually make a feature film based on this television series, which was quite a radical idea at the time. The studio was completely concerned, deeply concerned and worried that this wasn't going to work. And they started and stopped the process several times with different directors, different crews, different ideas, different scripts, and always kind of pulled back in fear that this was going to be a big mistake. That's one of the reasons it's called Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was called Star Trek the Motion Picture, so people say, oh, it's not a television show on a movie theater. And then you'll see at the bottom of the poster, it says, there is no comparison, i.e. there's no comparison between what you saw on TV and what you're now going to see on the big cinema screen. They were just terrified of the whole thing. Nevertheless, it got going as a project, and there was a group of people that were friends of mine that they hired to do the visual effects for the movie. Because I was actually under contract at Paramount for another company that I developed called Future General Corporation, where we were developing a lot of new technologies for movies, new movie theaters, new cameras, new simulation rides, new ways of doing digital compositing, all kinds of stuff we were developing. And I was a little bit arrogant in the sense that when I was asked if I would be interested in doing the visual effects for Star Trek, I said, no, that's a television series. Because I had done 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I just kind of had this attitude that Star Trek really wasn't up to my level of expectation. So they were kind of angry at me at the studio. They got started with this group of people who I won't name them, some of them are still friends of mine, who messed it all up. They tried to do something very original, unique, and advanced technologically. They wanted to use a lot of computer graphics. They got way into the project and nothing worked. And the whole thing was kind of derailing, and they had been at it for a year and a half or 2 years, I don't know how long it was, and had not gotten one shot done. And the studio was faced with a deadline to deliver the movie. And so the context of the situation at the studio was quite unusual in that the word was out on the street that the movie might not be delivered on time. And the exhibitors who had paid in advance to show the movie, it was one of the largest advance payments ever done by exhibitors to buy the rights to show the movie. So they had $30 million in cash in the bank, which they were using to finance the production. And the exhibitors never liked blind bidding. They would pay in advance for movies that weren't any good. So they wanted to kill this process. And so the exhibitors banded together, I think it was under NATO, National Association of Theater Owners, to file a class action lawsuit against Paramount Pictures if they didn't deliver the picture on time. So I got rounded up to come into a meeting at Paramount, and they said, we have a big problem here. We got to get this movie done. And the head of the studio, who will remain nameless, said, gentlemen, and I'm there with my lawyer and their lawyer and all these VIPs and Bob Wise and everybody on the movie. We've got to get this movie done. I don't care if it's any good. I don't care if it has black leader. I don't care if it has missing scenes. I don't care if the story makes sense. This movie is opening Pearl Harbor Day, which was December 7th or something. Just get it done. And then he left the room. He was really angry, furious, which left me open to negotiate. So I agreed to do the effects for the movie, reluctantly, in exchange for my freedom, because the studio had dumped on show scan and simulation rides. All the stuff I was developing at Future General was being abandoned in favor of this movie. And I said, well, I'm not going to sit here under contract and not be able to do what I want to do. That's going to be the exchange of value, is I'm a free man the minute this movie's done. Compositing at that time was all optical. There was nothing digital available. It didn't exist at that time, so it was all optical. And the techniques we used kind of came from what we learned during Close Encounters and Blade Runner, of how to make mats so that we could superimpose one thing against another, make these called holdout mats, which would just allow you to superimpose a little object against another object and have you not see through it. And instead of using blue screen or something which was a very hard-edged kind of mat, we would do separate passes because we had a motion control system that we had designed that could do multiple shots of exactly the same motion. And one of the shots would be what we'd call the hero shot of the pod or of the Enterprise or whatever, with all these lights and lens flares and glows and things that you didn't want to get cut off by the hard edge of a mat. So we did all kinds of compositing where we would make these silhouettes of the object by just photographing it unlit against a white card in the background. So you'll see shots of the Enterprise with just white behind it, and it's all just a silhouette. That's to create the mat so that you can superimpose it over the Earth or the stars. But it also allowed all the lens flares and stuff in the original photography to remain and not get cut off by the edge of a mat. And so every one of those little vehicles that's flying around, or a little zero-G astronaut or whatever, is a separate shot on a separate set with a separate miniature at a different scale. And one of the things I kind of brought to it is I imagined all these things in my head. And we had this wonderful miniature cinematographer, Dave Stewart. And he and I had this magic language. I would actually just say, I'd say, listen, I think, Dave, this particular shot is going to be 12 seconds long. And I want this little pod here to move from the lower right to the middle of the shot in this angle and move away from camera in 12 seconds. And he'd say, got it, done. And so we had this visual language of describing all these things that would then be composited together and actually fall into place with one another and seem to be all in the same place at the same time. And Dave Stewart was just one of the great masters of understanding my language and being able to photograph it with such incredible attention to detail to do all these different passes at different speeds of different scales and have it all match up.